Jane and I will moderate a Q&A period here. You could put a question in the chat and we'll watch for that. But you could also, and there's no easy way to do this. I know you could raise your hands, but only one of us can only see one of like 4 different screens for all of you. So we might miss you. So I could just ask you to unmute and raise questions. Just to remind you, we heard about the agency's approach, especially the RAD program from Nicole. We learned that we no longer live in our forebears climate from Doug. We had a very thoughtful look at what that meant to his forebears from Mike and the current tribe's effort at restoring white bark pine, for instance. And I can't help but take the image of beavers helping us adapt to changes in the aquatic ecosystems, Molly. So thanks for that image too. And so either put a question in chat or simply unmute. And if you want to direct it to anyone in particular, you're welcome to do that.
I see Mike Dirklow's hand up, so let's start with Mike.
I just, before I forget, I just wanted to say, Nicole, when you started, there was in the vision, it talked about natural and cultural resource managers. When I came from natural resource department, I was the environmental director, to cultural preservation. I went to council and somebody asked me, Mike, why are you still doing climate change as in the preservation department? And I was like, why are you not? Because natural resources and cultural resources are one and the same. So if we could change or add to your vision statement, it's not just the cultural and natural resource managers, but that they are one and the same thing. Thank you.
I love that, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, and we know that is the, we have been learning over the years with the work we've been doing that is absolutely true. And it's interesting, especially where we're coming from on, I'm a U.S. Geological Survey employee, and we're trying to bring so many people along with us on the federal side too. And so, getting that language right is so important. But getting everyone to understand why we're changing our language that takes a long time, but we're trying. And thanks, Mike. We will continue to try to do that and to reinforce that is truly the case.
And what an opportunity right now, right? With President Biden's memo. Yeah. Let's do this. Skoda.
So again, feel free to unmute comments and questions.
I just want to hear a comment from James Rattlingleaf. I like to put him on the spot as much as I can.
Doug Cluck. Well, thank you again, and good. I think it's really hard to add to what's been said already. I just sort of wanted to respond to some of the presentations here. Again, my name is James Rattlingleaf. I serve as a co-principal investigator for the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, and working with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, as well as my tribe, the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. And I do think that we are in an interesting time. A lot of my work, centers around the issues of traditional ecological knowledge, and I think that's something that Mr. Dirgel mentioned about the memo from Biden, and talking about really, developing and supporting these guidelines to incorporate TEK into federal decision making. I do believe that that's a opportunity. If we're talking about transformation and moving from response to transformation, I do think that That's one area that I think we all need to look at. In a year, we'll have federal guidelines of how to do that. To me, that's amazing. I've lived long enough to really see the American government, maybe take a look at our understanding, our ways of knowing, our worldviews, and bring it into really, what tribes have been talking about, stating a lot for many years is, when do we come to the table? When do we support decision-making? And then how is our knowledge really validated and verified in a way that that needs to be? I do think that the work at NCCAS is important work. We know that this year, there's tremendous support from Congress to do this work. And I do think that we got to come together and figure out how we're going to do that in more effective ways. I do think that training capacity development is another key strategy that we need to do. How are we going to prepare those emerging scientists in our cast to work with tribes, work with tribal people, and work with tribal knowledge? Not that we separate those things, but then we to move the conversation forward. I do think that there are opportunities to do that. I think that again, going forward, we have to think about the role of tribal colleges again. We have 30, I think we have 20 tribal colleges in our North Central region. And we sort of been challenged to really understand what that engagement strategy looks like with them. Each one of them is at a different place in development and how they're working with climate change science. But I do think that that's in front of us. And I think all of us as a CAST network, all of us as scientists, all of us who work and do this work every day, we need to think about them and continue to do that work. Maybe my final point again, and again, you can thank Doug for bringing me into the conversation, but I do think it's going to take leadership to do this work. It's not easy, especially talking about things that we haven't worked with before. And so I think we allow ourselves to make mistakes in doing this work, but there are mistakes that that we can minimize, where it doesn't really affect negatively our work, our science work, our research, and our education. So again, I go back to leadership. What kind of leaders are we developing to do this work? How do we improve? Then always keep ourselves accountable to that. How do we share that message and tell that story with not only our colleagues and our networks, but also to Mike Dergelow's point, we're all here, we all believe in climate change, but what about the others that don't? What's our strategy to work with them? And so I'll stop there. Thank you, Doug, for bringing me into conversation. And by the way, you gave a great talk.
You're welcome, James. And my only comment about helping people make decisions is, and we don't want to help them. We don't want to help them make bad decisions. And that's actually a really to me, it's a very salient point, because people make decisions no matter what, right? How do we prevent maladaptation, right? Because we see it all the time. And I don't have the answer to that question, but those of you who work in that field more than I do probably have some guesses, because you've probably seen it. You say something and they take it the wrong way, right? Or it's not quite understood the way you'd planned on them understanding it. Like, I don't know, planting the wrong tree or something like that. Golly, I heard of that, a project up in Michigan. I'm sorry, I can't remember who. I know they planted a whole bunch of trees that they never should have planted up there. But that's a case in point of maladaptation in making bad decisions based on all this climate information. Because if we come at it from and I do come at it from I don't try to be too advocational, although I do present the science pretty strongly. I just wonder what people think about how to get people to make better decisions, as opposed to,
Yes, Shelley.
Don't you think, Doug, that in some cases, the climate itself is telling them a little bit of what to do? Decades ago, when we started worrying about global warming, there was less, I think that there's just less palpable change. As you've shown, there's more palpable change. There's a question in the chat from Shelley Crosby to Mike about the camas and how elders are thinking differently about planting camas and how that incorporates climate change. That was a great case. I think we'd all take a few more minutes to hear about it.
Yeah, they have, Bill and Shelley, they have started to look at those things a little bit differently. And show of hands, how many of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Kimmerer? If you haven't, that's your homework assignment. You know, she talks about reciprocity, but she also talks about assisted migration and helping our plants. And that's how I explain to them, to the elders, is that it's our responsibility. It really is. These are our relations. They're our relatives. The plants are our relatives, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they can survive. And she talks about assisted migration, that climate change is happening so fast that they don't, what would have taken 100 years for them to migrate or whatever to survive. And that's what it's all about, right? Survival for them and for us.
Lots of hands went up, Mike.
Yeah.
And I know ecologists are pretty nervous about that concept of assisted migration, but the concept that humans can help, I appreciate that positive thought. I'll just say that before we end.
And part of it too is just, identifying those areas that, we can say camas used to be there. Whether it's climate change or human activity, it's not there no more. So should we put it back to where it was? Yes.
We have just a couple more minutes. If you've got a question you'd like to put in the chat, and also you're welcome, of course, to take a look at the schedule for the next few days and let us know if you didn't get registered for something that you'd really like to get to now. We'll try to fit you in.
I have a question for Molly. Thank you all for all those great talks. Molly, I had a question about the slide that you showed about the Climate Adaptation Fund, the projects in different ecosystems, and you had some urban ecosystems on that list. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about the importance and the differences about doing restoration and climate adaptation in urban ecosystems.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, we have funded a handful of projects that are taking place in relatively urban spaces. Some of them are actually in urban areas. So there's a project in New York City, working in New York City parks, looking at their restoration efforts within New York City parks and how they're starting to bring in a different species planting list to be more sort of forward looking in terms of like warming and drying, but also in terms of concerns about heavier storm events and trees that will be able to withstand some of those projections as well. There's projects down in Texas as well as Philadelphia, again, kind of very urban environments. We're looking at restoration through the lens of a changing climate. Some of the projects are taking place just outside of urban areas, but that provide sort of downstream benefits, whether it's water resources and to relatively larger urban communities. So yeah, they're definitely different. And when we're evaluating those projects, they're, a little bit harder, a little bit apples and oranges from the perspective of if you're looking at, say, the biodiversity conservation value of an urban park versus, say an intact, pristine, old growth forest can be different. But one of the reasons why we've chosen to try to invest a portion of our portfolio in those urban spaces is also because of the human co-benefits that can arise from those projects, as well as building a broader constituency in support of conservation and in support of climate adaptation work. Those projects can be quite visible to lots of people. And so we've kind of supported them for a variety of different reasons, both for their adaptation value, for their conservation value. A lot of those areas, those parks are really critical for, stepping stone migration areas for birds and other species, even if they're not always as widely recognized from their conservation value, especially to those of us that work in very large, pristine landscapes out west. If folks are interested, I'll paste into the chat the link to our website where you can actually get an interactive version of our map of funded projects, and you can click on some projects if you want to learn more about examples. Also some reports that describe stories from our portfolio as well.
So last words before we wrap up this session, and if you have registered for sessions later in the week, we'll look forward to seeing you then. If not, check out the schedule. But let me leave it open one more minute here.
And Bill, I just put our website address in the chat, so csktclimate.org. If anybody has any questions or anything for me, I only charge 20 bucks for questions and 40 bucks for answers. No, because of inflation, it used to be 10 and 20, but now it's 20 and 40.
Yeah. Climate counseling is becoming more costly. I appreciate it.